Welcome to today's webinar on WebLogic Vulnerabilities and the impact on Oracle eBusiness Suite. My name is Phil Ryman. I'm the Director of Business Development at Integrigy and will be the moderator for this e-learning session. Our speaker today is Stephen Coast. Steve is the Chief Technology Officer and founder of Integrigy Corporation. He's been working with Oracle products since 1994. For the past 17 years, Steve has focused on security and auditing aspects of the Oracle eBusiness Suite and Oracle databases, and has written and presented on these topics at various national and regional conferences, including OAUG and the National Collaborative Conferences. I'll now turn it over to Steve.
Thanks so much, Phil. Today we're going to talk about a number of WebLogic vulnerabilities that have recently been released, and there's actually public exploit code out there, and there's active exploitation of these vulnerabilities, and servers are actively being attacked. Today's topic is specifically around the Oracle Business Suite. So how does these vulnerabilities impact your Oracle Business Suite environment? And so for the next hour, we'll walk through and kind of talk about the vulnerabilities, what the impact is, and what the impact is to an Oracle Business Suite environment. The short answer is, fortunately, the impact is limited based on some security features that Oracle Business Suite does have and has implemented over time, but there is still an impact, especially internally. So we'll walk through how this works, how the vulnerabilities work, and what you need to be thinking about in your Oracle Business Suite environment. Before we get started, a very quick background about Integrigy. Integrigy was founded in 2002 by former Big Six consultants working on large Oracle Business Suite projects, and security was not being handled back then. The app's password is still apps. People were afraid to change it. That's the environment we started on. We've come a long way since then. But again, Oracle Business Suite is a very large, complex environment, and you need to really address security in it. Integrigy does this two ways for our clients. One is we have a set of products, the first being AppSentry. So think of AppSentry as the Oracle Secure Configuration Guide for the Oracle Business Suite, which was written by Integrigy for Oracle. And AppSentry automates all the checking of that. So it goes far and above and beyond the Secure Configuration Guide. It checks over 400 settings within the Oracle Business Suite. But the key is it checks the Oracle Business Suite, the database, and the application server. So it checks the entire environment to make sure that it's secure, validates the security, and also walks you through workflows in terms of how do you actually make sure that you have the appropriate users, passwords are changed for those users, things like that. For a proactive layer of defense, we'll actually talk about AppDefend briefly on this call because it does provide some protection against these WebLogic vulnerabilities. AppDefend is an enterprise application firewall that's specifically designed for Oracle Business Suite and PeopleSoft. So this is a proactive layer of protection that really helps Oracle Business Suite. It virtually patches Oracle Business Suite. So if you're not immediately applying the Oracle critical patch updates, AppDefend is that mitigating control. If you're a third-party support provider, AppDefend can provide a mitigating control around the critical patch updates since you don't have those when you're with a third-party support provider. Integrigy also performs a lot of consulting services for our clients. So these are true consulting services, a world-class consulting team that works with Oracle Business Suite, Oracle database customers on a daily basis, doing security assessments, helping them with very complex SOX, HIPAA, PCI compliance challenges. So how do you actually take that and say, okay, we act as a mediator between the internal auditors and the Oracle Business Suite team. So how do you do auditing? How do you actually make sure that the application security controls cannot be circumvented by direct database access and things like that? That was the challenges that we address with clients and actually make sure that their environment is both secure, but they also can meet their compliance needs, but also not operationally impact the environment. So most of our team is former Oracle Business Suite DBAs who really understand Oracle Business Suite and what you can do, what you can't do, but they're very well trained also in security to say, okay, let's make sure this environment is secure as possible. And we also do a lot of security design services. So we're working with clients to implement auditing and logging, encryption, Oracle TDE, Oracle Database Vault, Oracle external auditing products like Imperva and Guardium. So we proactively work and how do you implement those products? How do you do requirements definition around those different products and things like that? And then finally, we're backed up by a world-class research team. So we're actively finding security bugs in Oracle Business Suite. We're actively working, such as this presentation, how do you actually secure WebLogic? How do you make sure that these vulnerabilities are not in your environment? And finally, Integrigy is an Oracle Gold partner. So we have a very good relationship with both the Oracle Business Suite team and the Oracle Security team to how to actually address security issues within the Oracle Business Suite. So enough about Integrigy. Let's kind of jump into the presentation, and we'll kind of go right into the detail here. So these are the risk matrices that Oracle has released, and we're kind of going to walk through these and kind of explain to you how these work, what are the issues, and what you need to be thinking about. So today's call is going to be focused around 3 security vulnerabilities that have been released in the last month by Oracle. 2 were released as part of the Oracle Critical Patch Update, October 2020. However, there was an issue, and so Oracle actually released a very rare one-off security vulnerability that has an additional patch. So on November 1st, about 2 weeks after the original October 2020 CPU release, Oracle released a one-off security vulnerability that includes a different patch. So that's kind of very important. We'll kind of walk through what that actual vulnerability is too. So there's 3 vulnerabilities, and they work together. These are all highly interrelated in terms of the vulnerability and the risk to your environment. So the first vulnerability is 14882. And so this vulnerability is an authorization bypass in Oracle Business Suite, or in the WebLogic console for Oracle Business Suite. And so if we kind of go through the columns here, column A gives you the CVE ID, which is a common vulnerability enumeration ID. So the usefulness for that is you can actually Google the CVE number. So if you just go into Google, or Twitter is also a very interesting resource to do. So if you go into the Twitter search bar and type in that CVE number, you get a lot of information. So you can see what's happening around these vulnerabilities, what the discussion is, what blog posts and things like that have been released. Column B shows you the component. So this is in the WebLogic console. So this is limited to that one component. And so as part of Oracle WebLogic server, there's a console that you can manage Oracle WebLogic. So that's just like a small standalone application. And these vulnerabilities are very specific to the console. However, there's been a number of Oracle WebLogic server vulnerabilities over time in many different parts of Oracle WebLogic. Remotely exploitable without authentication is an important column. So this means, can someone just see your WebLogic server and actually compromise it? Can they do something bad to it? And the first vulnerability is yes, it is a remotely exploitable without authentication. The second one is not, though. And why this is important is these 2 vulnerabilities, vulnerability 1 and 2, actually work together. So if I can use 1, I can then use 2 to actually dramatically increase my privileges. So even though it's remotely exploitable without authentication, I can't exploit number 2 without being authenticated. However, if I use number 1, I can bypass authentication, then I can actually exploit number 2. Column D is the base score. The base score is a scale of 1 to 10, take over the entire server. So the closer I am to 10, the more likely I can compromise the entire server. And so 9.8 is fundamentally a 10. The reason it's a 9.8 and not a 10 is I can't actually get root access on a Linux server. So I can compromise the server, I can do things with the operating system, I can compromise all the WebLogic server. However, I can't compromise the root account on the server. So is that important? Probably not, because if I can take over the WebLogic server, I can do things at the operating system level. That's not that important. And then we go over to the last column, column E. This shows that I can actually read and write things to the server. I can execute things at the server level, and I can also bring the server up and down. I can crash the server pretty easily if I want. Vulnerability number 2 is the ability for someone who actually has privileges in the WebLogic console. So I have in Oracle Business Suite, that would be the WebLogic account. If I can log into the WebLogic account, I can actually then execute commands at the operating system level by changing a URL. That vulnerability probably isn't that important, even though it's a 7.2 on a scale of 1 to 10. It's actually not that important because that console should be highly restricted. So really no one else should be accessing except for your DBAs. They should have the WebLogic account with the password. They should be the ones connecting to it. So typically we would actually kind of say, well, that's a vulnerability, but it's really not that meaningful because the person who's actually logging into the console has access to the operating system already, most likely. So really there's not much of a vulnerability there in an Oracle Business Suite environment. And if I have a standalone WebLogic environment, I have very strict segregation of duties. Yes, that's a very problematic bug. But in an Oracle Business Suite environment, bug number 2 is not problematic. However, if I combine number 1 and 2, it becomes very problematic. So the key is 2 standalone as a bug isn't that meaningful, but when I combine the 2, they actually become meaningful. Then you see the last column, column F here. Column F shows you which versions are vulnerable. The listed versions here are only those tested by Oracle, and the only ones tested by Oracle are currently supported versions. This bug we have verified back to 10.3 of WebLogic and above. Potentially earlier versions of WebLogic may be vulnerable, however, we haven't tested those. So every version, even if you're running an unsupported version and it's not listed here, it is still vulnerable to the security vulnerability. And finally, vulnerability number 3. Vulnerability 1 and 3 are actually the same vulnerability. What happened was Oracle didn't fix vulnerability number 1 correctly, and therefore had to go fix it again. So 1 and 3 are really the same security bug. And the way Oracle looks at this is every single time we do a fix, we assign a CVE number, and it's actually kind of quote a security bug. But sometimes it's not truly a new security bug. It's that, hey, we fixed it once. By the way, we didn't fix it right, so we actually have to go back and fix it again. So really 1 and 3 are the same security bug underlying. That's why the data all here is the same, but it's really 2 separate different fixes because they fixed it once, people figured out a way around it, we had to go fix it again. Therefore, you actually have 2 security bugs. And we'll walk through this in detail and I'll show you exactly what they did wrong. So when we look at these 3 vulnerabilities, we'll go into detail and each of them a little bit more. I'll do a little demonstration here in a second. The first vulnerability, 14882, is an authorization bypass in the WebLogic console. So if I can connect to your WebLogic console and see the login page, I now have full access to your WebLogic console because there is a security bug that allows me to change the URL. And by changing the URL ever so slightly, I can bypass the authentication. So then I have full access to your WebLogic console. And now it's up to the imagination of the attacker. The person who actually wants to do something, they can do all kinds of really, really fun stuff. One of them is potentially executing things at the operating system. I could actually deploy new applications to your WebLogic console. I can change the application code. I could put in new code. I can stop the server. I can add new users to the WebLogic console, things like that. So there's a lot of very fun things that I can do. That hasn't really been in the public exploits actually been mentioned much on that. I can do many different things. People tend to focus in on one item. And what they focused in on is actually 14883, which is the second vulnerability. And remember, this vulnerability, the second one here, requires authorization. So if I can log into the WebLogic console, I can actually execute things at the operating system level. I can actually send in a special URL, and that will actually get executed at the operating system level. By itself, it's not meaningful because, again, who should have access to the WebLogic console in Oracle Business Suite environment? Really your DBAs. And they already have operating system access, so this isn't important. However, if I combine number 1 and number 2, I can now take over the entire server very easily. It's very simple to execute. And by the way, I can make this automated. That's kind of the power here, is I can actually do this in a very automated way. It's a very clean, very simple to execute. Otherwise, I have to go into the server and actually start mucking around with the pages. And it works okay, but it takes a little bit of time and effort. If I combine number 1 and 2, I can just actually send one URL to your WebLogic server, to the console, and actually compromise the entire server, have it automatically install software for me. I can do this across the internet and actually do it in a very automated fashion. That's why the power of 1 and 2 combined makes this a very nasty set of bugs, very easy to exploit, very easy to compromise large numbers of servers. And then finally, fix number 3 is 14750. That is actually a second fix because a number of people figured out how to bypass the fix that Oracle put in place for 14882. Therefore, Oracle had to actually release a second bug fix to actually solve the second problem that people had encountered. And I'll show you what the problem was and how it works here in a second. So when we look at this, what is actually the bug? So if we talk about the WebLogic console, the login URL is console/login, login form.jsp, and that's how I log in. And then once I log in, I then actually have the URL console.portal is my URL. So if you do this in the browser, this is what you'll see in the URL bar. And all the different pages work off the console.portal page. So it's a page, and then you pass in a parameter, and it tells you actually what page to display. Classic web application. And in a typical Oracle Business Suite environment, the WebLogic console should be running on a port like 7001. And since you use rapid install and you can change the port number, you can actually have that port number be somewhere in the 7000 range. So it can be either 7001 all the way up to 7100. So what is the vulnerability here? Well, all I have to do is actually in the third section here, I just have to change the URL ever so slightly. And instead of just doing console.portal, I actually put in images and these special encoded strings, which then the WebLogic server will interpret as a path traversal, and will back up one. And what's happening here is authentication is only checked for console. It's not checked for console images. It's not checked for console CSS. It's only checked for console. And it checks the authorization first and then initiates this path traversal. So therefore, what's happening is I'm actually able to bypass the authentication. So this is a very simplistic problem. Many different web applications have been vulnerable to these types of attacks over years, and it's just basically a coding error by Oracle. And at the last point here, you can see what that code, so when I see that %252E, that translates to %2E, and that %2E translates to period. %2F translates to a slash. And what this is called is double encoding. So I encode it once, and the reason you have to sometimes encode things on the internet and with HTML and HTTP is because these are interpreted different points. And so what you do is you encode it, and then the WebLogic server will decode it for you, so you can pass this around easily, so it's not misinterpreted at points. However, at some points that it can be misinterpreted, and this is the problem. So what I'm doing is double encoding it to kind of bypass the filters that Oracle had. Oracle had rules around this to say if you pass in %2E, don't accept that, that's not good. But they didn't have a filter to say if you pass in %252E, which then would translate to %2E, which then would translate to a // which would back me up one point in the path, which would then bypass the authentication, because the authentication said, well, if you're checking console images, you're fine. But if you're checking console, you need to be authenticated. So this is a very classic path traversal. This is just a classic coding bug by someone at Oracle. And that's how these kind of security vulnerabilities happen. And I'll demonstrate this in a second for you. The second bug, 1488283, allows OS shell execution. So the first bug, 882, I can do a lot with. I can actually have full access to your console. I can install new applications. I can change your application code. One of the things that we would first do for this security vulnerability is we would go into the WebLogic console and actually install a second application that would give me full query capability to your Oracle Business Suite database. So Integrigy, if we were writing exploit code for this, that's what we would do. So that'd be, to us, very powerful, because now we have full control over the Oracle Business Suite environment. We can have full access to the database. We just create our own little application that gives us unlimited query access. We can do anything we want. We have all your data. That's our approach to this. However, in the world, most people don't know Oracle Business Suite. They don't know that there's an application behind this and what they'd want to do with it, that then they could go grab all your social security numbers. What they actually want to do now is Bitcoin mining. They want to actually mine cryptocurrency on your server. So if I actually get operating system level access, I can now go in and install crypto mining software and use your CPU cycles, and I can make money very easily that way. If I install this on 1,000 servers, having now 1,000 servers at my disposal to actually now mine cryptocurrency, and there's one called Monero, which is anonymous, and then basically I can just go mine this, use all your CPU cycles. I don't have to pay for the power or the servers. I can get this all for free, and I can very easily change this to money. That's the key here. And that's why this is very powerful, two bugs together, in that I can now go across the internet, go attack many, many, many servers in an automated fashion, and install this very easily and rapidly, install the crypto mining software, and start making money right away. So that's why there's this focus on operating system access. in terms of attacking servers today. There's other reasons that, yeah, I can potentially go get your data and stuff, but that's kind of a motivation for attacks that we're seeing very often, and a number of our clients have actually been impacted by that. So in order to do that operating system access, someone found another security vulnerability in Oracle WebLogic that then allows me to actually execute arbitrary Java classes. And so what I do is then find a Java class that does something I want it to do. So what happens is I pass in this handle parameter, I can pass in a Java class method with just the runtime that says, okay, go do this. And this is a very simple example. So if you're running this on Windows, I put the actual exploit code in. And in this case, if you're running this on Windows, it actually just opens up the calculator. In other cases, I would actually have it download a cryptocurrency mining software, install it, and then start executing it. And that would open up just another port, another session that would allow me to go pick up those Bitcoins or Monero currency later. There is at least one, this shell session Java class is very important because that's a helper function. So a lot of people are tagging off this, looking for that. However, there's other helper functions. Again, this is up to the imagination of the attacker, what they want to do. This is just one helper function that gives me direct operating system access, which is very powerful, very easy. But again, there's probably a dozen, 24 ones that if you look through WebLogic code long enough, you'll find, hey, I can do this. This would be very interesting, things like that. But again, these two vulnerabilities combined become very powerful because now it's an automated attack. It's very easy to exploit. Where this vulnerability alone, again, this requires authorization, and it's not meaningful without I can't exploit this unless I exploit the other vulnerability first. So that's why these two are powerful. This vulnerability would be a ho-hum in Oracle Business Suite all by itself because you need authorization, and the only person who has authorization is the DBAs, so really there's nothing that anyone can do with it. However, when I combine it with the previous exploit, it becomes very, very powerful. So what happened on this third fix? So Oracle fixed the first bug, so 14882, added a fix, and the fix is very simplistic. It was very simple. So all I had to do is look for that special string because they were looking for the other strings already. And so just someone at Oracle didn't think about, hey, you can double encode. So the %252e, which translates then to %2e, well, they were looking for %2e. They weren't looking for %252e, so they just added that check in. They said, hey, we're going to look for %252e, and now we've kind of blocked the vulnerability. Perfect, works. We released the patch, everything's great. However, the security researchers came along, and this is how this works in the security world. So when you think of security bugs are super sophisticated and hackers are just geniuses, right? Well, in this case, somebody figured out Oracle put the fix in, and it was an uppercase E they were looking for, and no one thought, hey, lowercase works too. So the genius hackers came up with, hey, if you just pass in the same string but use lowercase, you can bypass Oracle's fix. So therefore, Oracle now has to release a second security bug and a second security patch, which was in the form of 14750, that said, hey, we're going to check for uppercase and lowercase now. So this is how security vulnerabilities work. If you think hackers are geniuses, sometimes it's really sophisticated, sometimes it's really powerful. You're like, oh my God, that's amazing that somebody figured that out. Other times it's like this, and like, yeah, that was kind of pretty obvious, and Oracle made a pretty obvious mistake, and it was pretty obvious that somebody could find it right away. But again, this is the world of security vulnerabilities, and this is what you see in reality. And some security vulnerabilities are very simplistic like this, and again, this is how it works, and I can compromise a large number of servers because of these type of security vulnerabilities. But again, the third security vulnerability here is a fix for the first one, and all they had to do is now check for lowercase instead of just checking for uppercase. So they check for uppercase and lowercase, and the bug is fixed. So we'll do a quick demonstration here. So we'll kind of jump out to our WebLogic console. Again, this is an Oracle Business Suite environment. This is a 12.2.5 environment that has not been actively patched. And so it's running on port 7001. You can see the URL up there. And so again, I need a logon here. I can't log in here. I can't do anything until I have a login. And for an Oracle Business Suite environment, the default login is WebLogic. The default password is welcome1. And if I tried it now to access console.portal, again, I just type that in, it'll redirect me to the login page. I don't have access to it. However, now if I actually go in here and I change my URL to that attack string, and so now instead of just accessing console, I have now added in, just go to images, because images doesn't have any authorization. Again, anyone can access any image and it bypasses the authorization then. However, if I add in that second part of the string, the %252e, %252e, %252f, which is dot dot backslash, I back up one. So I back out of images, I back into console, and you actually run it twice. Sorry about that. Something was wrong in when I copied and pasted. And so again, I don't have any authorization to the server, and now I am into the server as an administrator, and I can actually start making any changes I want. So if I can go into servers, and again, I don't have any authorization here, and now I can see everything running in this Oracle Business Suite environment. I can do quite a bit here. The reason the images aren't working is because, again, remember, I've messed up the URL, and so I've kind of bypassed the images. So the images are looking at a different spot. So it's a little ugly, but it works perfectly fine. I have full authorization here. The images won't show up anywhere, so I can't maybe view anything that has an image on it. But I have full access. I can go into the OA core. I can now start doing a lot of different things here. What becomes very powerful here is now I'm going to exploit that second vulnerability, and I can actually put that URL in and actually now execute things at the operating system level. So very powerful, very simple to bypass the authorization. I now have control of the server. I can do a lot of different things here. It's a little funky sometimes. Some pages work, some pages don't. You have to kind of mess with the URL to go back. So when I figure out what the URL is, I just kind of mess with it and go back. So it's not super simple, but it's not that complicated. And I can shut down the server. I can do quite a few different things here. So that's how easy that vulnerability is to exploit. And that's why this vulnerability is fairly powerful, is that it's super simple to exploit. So now the key question is, what's vulnerable? Who needs to be thinking about this? Fortunately, in an Oracle Business Suite environment, if you're still on 11i or on 12.1, 11i and 12.1 do not run, and also 12.0 is included here too, do not run WebLogic. Those are still on the Oracle application server. So when Oracle moved to 12.2, they incorporated WebLogic into the environment. Therefore, only 12.2 is vulnerable. What's interesting about Oracle Business Suite is the WebLogic admin server is actually on a separate port. It's not running on the standard Oracle Business Suite port. So if I'm running iSupply or iStore and I haven't made a catastrophic misconfiguration in my environment, I'm not exposing port 7001, or in this case, again, it can be any port based on the numbering I'm using when I'm installing my eBusiness Suite environment. I'm not exposing that 7000 port to the internet. So I'm not exposing the admin server. So WebLogic console should never be exposed externally in an Oracle Business Suite environment. A number of environments, other applications like PeopleSoft and OBIE have the WebLogic console on the same port. So this is really very specific to Oracle Business Suite, why it's protected for most external environments. However, internally, most networks are flat. That means anybody can connect to any server at any port, and there's not a lot of restrictions internally in many organizations. So therefore, the WebLogic console running on port 7001 is typically accessible to anyone on the internal network. So if anyone compromises the internal network, somebody's VPNing in, someone's physically on the internal network, they can most likely reach the WebLogic console. We don't see a lot of organizations that restrict this really well. There are some, probably 10 or 20%, restrict very well within the internal network. A lot of people don't. So therefore, it is vulnerable. You can connect to it. And that's kind of the risk here is much more around the internal than the external. And why does this work in Oracle Business Suite environment? The way Oracle Business Suite works is a little different than other WebLogic applications. because they're using the Oracle HTTP server as the main server, and that runs separately, and then it has the Java containers behind it. And what they did was they actually put the admin server, which runs the WebLogic console, on a separate port. And this, again, can be HTTP, HTTPS for any of these connections. And so typically an end user would connect, and they can connect to 7001 directly, or to connect to the main application, you'd go through the load balancer or reverse proxy. You connect to the Oracle WebLogic HTTP server, which delivers static content, and then for the application, runs a separate set of Java containers for like OA core, forms, web services. So the key here is the way this is working is the admin server is on a separate port. So when you're exposing Oracle E-Business Suite externally, you're typically not exposing that 7001 port in the admin server externally. So therefore, that's why it is protected on the external environment. However, some people do accidentally open up port 7001 to the internet, say, hey, well, we need all these different ports open, and we'll open up too many ports versus opening up the bare minimum required. So a very quick check. I'd be shocked that many environments have accidentally exposed 7001, but we'll talk about it in a second. People do expose port 7001, and that shouldn't be done ever. So how do you fix this? The key way to fix this is actually applying the recommended patches by Oracle, and this is a two-step process. So step one is apply the main WebLogic patch set update for the Oracle 2020 critical patch update. So again, there's the patch number for a typical Oracle E-Business Suite 12.2 environment, because it is running 10.3.6 of WebLogic. This is the patch set update for October 2020, which has the first fix. So it has the fix for the first and second bugs. However, it does not include the second fix that fixes the first fix. And so therefore, this is a two-step process. So there are actually two different WebLogic patches that need to be applied. So there is a WebLogic server overlay patch for 10.3.6 for the October 2020 PSU. This will be all cumulative in the January 2021 CPU, but for right now, you'll have to actually apply two different WebLogic patches. Again, the second WebLogic patch is a very much smaller patch, very simple to install. How do you know this is working? Very simply, you can just actually, here's the URLs, you can actually put them in and actually see if they work, if you can bypass the console authentication. So you'll go to port 7001, append this URL, and you can actually see if it works or not. We recommend you do uppercase and lowercase to check both, just to make sure everything's working appropriately. And if the patches are applied, you'll actually get a 404 error, which is page not found error. However, if the console is displayed, again, it'll be missing the images. Therefore, then you know it doesn't work. If the first URL works, but the second one doesn't work, if the first one returns a 404, but the second uppercase version returns the console page, then you know you're missing the second patch. So kind of very important that you actually test both, because then you'll actually know what's wrong. Fundamentally, you can just check the second URL here, and you know if everything's properly applied if you're getting a 404. But if you actually check both, then you'll know, hey, the first patch worked fine, the second patch worked fine. So let's talk a little about the WebLogic console and Oracle Business Suite. Again, this is running on port 7000. And the problematic thing here is much above and beyond this security vulnerability. Because again, there's a number of security vulnerabilities released every single quarter by Oracle in the WebLogic server that you need to be thinking about and you need to be addressing. The admin server is a very interesting little process because it runs multiple ports simultaneously. It is running both HTTP, it's also running the WebLogic T3 protocol and the IIOP protocol. And so T3 is used to actually manage the server using different utilities. IIOP is used for some other functions. And there's also secure versions of these. So there's also HTTPS, T3S, and a secure version of IIOP. There's been multiple security vulnerabilities in these different protocols. So this one port, the 7001 port, which is the default port number, is actually running 3 different protocols. And in some cases, it'll actually be running 6 different protocols because it can run the secure versions also. there's been so many security vulnerabilities in WebLogic, like especially in T3 over time. And again, this shouldn't be exposed to the internet very often, so it doesn't really be as a problem as much. But again, these are exploitable and need to be protected. The fortunate thing about many environments is, as part of the April 2019 critical patch update, Oracle actually turned on restrictions on the WebLogic console port by default. So prior to the April 2019 critical patch update, there were no restrictions. Anybody could access internally the admin server, the WebLogic console, and do whatever they wanted. As part of the April 2019 critical patch update, they actually turned on the restriction. So this is only limited to local host by default. However, what we're seeing is many customers that, hey, we need access to that, and they actually reopened it up. So the key is, you may have April 2019 critical patch update installed, but the DBAs may have gone back in and actually said, oh, that's too restrictive for us, and we're actually just going to open up back to the world, and it's very easy to do. So this, by applying the April 2019 critical patch update, you may be protected or not protected. We're assuming you're not, because many DBAs have turned that feature off. And you can check by checking the auto-config variable there, the admin console access nodes, to see what IP addresses are set up there. What you need to set up is, and again, the DBAs need access to the WebLogic console, so this isn't something that should be totally turned off, but you need to somehow restrict access to it, because again, there's this security vulnerability and there's been a number of others. Because even within the October 2020 security patches for Oracle WebLogic, there was 3 T3 protocol errors. So there's 3 security bugs within the T3. The only one that's getting attention is the ones we've been discussing today, but there's been a number of other ones that have been addressed. And so turning on appropriate restrictions to the admin console here are very important. Make sure that it's not unrestricted. And then Oracle actually has made it more flexible, that the first version of this console access nodes controls were kind of just IP address by IP address. You couldn't set up a subnet or anything. As part of the TXKC Delta 11 patch, they actually added something called CEDAR, and this allows you to actually do subnets. You can actually put subnet strings in. So if you know where the DBAs, the typical IP addresses are, you can actually put this in. That allows a little bit wider access. What we recommend here is typically to do like a jump server or a Citrix server or a Windows terminal server that's limited access. And for these type of administrative functions, DBAs should be forced to go through that jump server before they can manage this directly. Therefore, you can just put in the single IP address of that jump server, and that becomes a fairly secure, robust environment, because that jump server is controlled, protected, only the DBAs can use it, and therefore then the admin servers are allowed to only that limited set. There's a MetaLink node out there that gives you all this information in gory detail, so you can actually check through what's the best way to protect this. If you haven't applied the April 2019 CPU, or for some reason you can't apply it, you can actually go do these connection filters yourself. So you can just go into the WebLogic console, go under domain, security filtering, connection filter, and you can define out what these connection filters are yourself. So all Oracle is doing is using a standard feature as part of Oracle Business Suite and the auto config variable, but you can set this up yourself, and that one MetaLink node has very good detail. Or if you actually just search for WebLogic connection filters on the internet, there is more than enough information that tells you exactly how to do these strings and how to set up the IP addresses and how to restrict certain ports. And again, the only port you really need is HTTP. So when you set up these connection filters, it allows you to set up the 3 protocols, HTTP, T3, or IIOP. There is no reason anyone really should be running an Oracle Business Suite environment, T3 or IIOP. So when you set up these connection filters, always deny T3 and IIOP and only allow HTTP or HTTPS to a very limited set of IP addresses. So again, it becomes a very effective, because again, if someone finds another WebLogic console vulnerability tomorrow, if you have these restrictions turned on, you're not vulnerable. There's no issue, because you've already blocked WebLogic console access, because only your couple of DBAs probably need access to it. Why does the whole company need access to that console? Because it could be vulnerable. It's vulnerable to this bug, and it can be vulnerable to future bugs too. So if you've messed up your configuration and you're doing something wrong and you've opened up too much, it is 7001 open on the internet. The key here is people are actively looking for this security bug. And so this applies both to Oracle Business Suite as well as any other applications you're running WebLogic. So people are searching for WebLogic servers on the internet. And so depending on your configuration of WebLogic in Oracle Business Suite, the WebLogic console is running on port 7001. On other applications, it may be running on the standard port that your application is running on also. So like a PeopleSoft environment, the console runs as part of the standard PeopleSoft application. And so therefore, it's exposed to the internet. If you expose PeopleSoft to the internet, you're exposing the console. Or if you've made that mistake on your firewall configuration and you're actually accidentally exposing port 7001, it is out there and people can actually actively find it. So for an Oracle Business Suite environment, make sure port 7001 or whichever port you're running it on is not exposed. The only port is that single port for Oracle Business Suite that allows the application to work. This admin server should never be exposed. And people can find it. So there are these search engines out there that instead of having to search the entire internet, there's two ways to find all these WebLogic servers. You either use a security search engine or you crawl the internet IP address by IP address. It's very grueling. It's horrible to do. We do it occasionally looking for Oracle Business Suite environments. Or you can just pop into one of these security engines, and I've put three of the key ones out there, and you just pop out there and you type in WebLogic. We'll give you an example here. And we'll type in WebLogic. And this is how, oops, I run out of searches here. Sorry about that. That you can actually go find WebLogic servers out there on the internet. It's very easy to do, very effective. And that's what these people are doing, is going out and actually searching for those and finding those right away. Typically in these search engines, Oracle Business Suite and PeopleSoft don't show up because they actually hide the server strings and they don't announce that they're actually an Oracle WebLogic server behind the scenes. So the nice thing is we are not seeing active exploitation yet of Oracle Business Suite and PeopleSoft because I don't think people have figured it out in terms of malicious attackers out on the internet. But we anticipate they'll kind of start focusing in on other applications in the near future to actually try to exploit this. But today, because it doesn't announce it's Oracle WebLogic, people aren't necessarily focusing in on eBusiness Suite and PeopleSoft environments. So this shows you an example here of actually what's happening out on the internet. So there's a group called the SANS Internet Storm Center, and they have sensors all over the internet, and they're tracking what's going on the internet, and they're kind of like checking, okay, what are people looking for? What's going on? What are people attacking? And so they have things called honeypots, which look like real servers, and all they're meant to do is just capture attacks. So if people are just scanning the internet, looking for WebLogic servers, and they find one, then they try to attack it. And what these honeypots do is advertise all these services, say, hey, I'm a WebLogic server, come attack me. And then they can capture that data and let you know what's going on. And so the chart here shows you for port 7001, there are over 500 scans a day against these sensors. And so therefore, there's probably hundreds of thousands of these scans, but these are just against their sensors. But their sensors are picking up 500 to 600 different scans a day of people just looking on port 7001, looking for these WebLogic admin servers. So people are like, well, who would ever do that? Well, people are actually doing that. If you look at these graphs, it's clearly showing that their sensors across the internet are actually picking up this activity, people looking for this. Again, this isn't compared to other ports, compared to like just a typical web application port. It's probably in the hundreds of thousands here. But again, this is meaningful. This is not that just background noise. This is actually people are looking for this out on the internet. So anyone says, well, no one's trying to attack these. Yes, there are active exploits. They see active scanning on 7001. They see active attacks against their honeypots against these WebLogic vulnerabilities. That's why these vulnerabilities are important, very important to patch immediately. So besides the Oracle Business Suite, what else should you be thinking about? Well, when you run Oracle products internally, especially Oracle Business Suite, there's typically other products around it. So if you are running Oracle Business Intelligence, OBIE, Oracle Coherence, Oracle SOA Suite, Oracle Identity Management, those all have a WebLogic component, all have the console, and that may be exposed externally, because some of these, if you are exposing externally, have that port, that console available. So it really depends on the application configuration. Today we focused on Oracle Business Suite, but again, there's lots of other things in environment you need to be thinking about. So where are we at? Where are we going? The key here is this is not going to be the last Oracle WebLogic vulnerability that's found, and there is a good emphasis on this today. So if you look at the Oracle security alert that got released, 21 different security researchers are credited with finding these bugs. So active people looking at this, looking for the next, quote, hot WebLogic vulnerability, because again, this is press, and they can actually now make money off of this. So they can actually sell these vulnerabilities to different services, which will pay them money. Organizations running vulnerable servers actually have bug bounty programs. So you're running a vulnerable WebLogic server, and someone says, hey, that server I can exploit and attack, they'll actually pay them money. So people can actually make money off this. So the security research, some people are, yeah, you can make $30,000, $40,000 doing this full time. That's real money, especially if you're like a student trying to pay yourself through college and spending some time. So having 21 security researchers credited with finding just these 3 different bugs in WebLogic is astronomical number. Typically, that would be 3 people. Very seldom, it may be 5 people, maybe 2 people happen to find it at the same time. Is a rarity that now 21 people actually were credited by Oracle, and there's probably a couple hundred others that have been looking at this. So the key here is we anticipate that this is not the last WebLogic security vulnerability that's going to get a lot of exposure, and that's going to be very critical in WebLogic. So this shouldn't be, hey, I applied the patch, I'm done, I can move on. You need to be thinking about how to proactively protect and harden WebLogic. So make sure that the WebLogic console is not exposed externally. Make sure that internally that you've blocked it down, but also throughout all of WebLogic. So within WebLogic on an Oracle Business Suite environment, I've got those other applications running. I've got OA Core. I've got the forms running. I've got the URL/OA HTML. There is a bunch of different components within WebLogic that are exposed by default in the Oracle Business Suite WebLogic environment. So that's very critical. And where they're going to find these bugs are in those components, and those would also be exposed externally. So if your Oracle Business Suite environment externally, iStore, iSupplier, is not properly configured, if you're not running the URL firewall, if you're not running the trusted responsibilities, if you're not running some proactive protection on those Oracle Business Suite environments externally, there are core WebLogic features and functions that are exposed externally just as part of Oracle WebLogic in an Oracle Business Suite environment running things like iStore and iSupplier. So you need web application firewalls. You need to be blocking those at potentially your load balancer or reverse proxy. We've done other presentations that discuss this. In the near future, we'll be releasing some additional WebLogic hardening guidance that help you block down and lock down the WebLogic more than it is by default in Oracle Business Suite. So if there's one takeaway from this, this is not the end. This is probably just the starting point, and you're going to see and hear a lot more about WebLogic security in the near future. One layer of proactive protection is, again, our AppDefend product will prevent most of these WebLogic vulnerabilities. So it blocks all these features within WebLogic that are delivered by default that you don't need. You don't need the web services atomic transactions as part of WebLogic in an Oracle Business Suite environment. You do not need the WebLogic console. You do not need these other features that are just deployed within WebLogic. So there's about 25 different URLs of different services and features within WebLogic. You need to block all those. AppDefend does that for you out of the box, as well as providing a lot of other capabilities such as enhanced logging of the application. It also protects web services and mobile applications. And for those who need a two-factor authentication solution for Oracle Business Suite, it provides that also, as well as the very important virtual patching of critical patch updates for Oracle Business Suite. So web vulnerabilities are present, ever-present danger in Oracle Business Suite, and AppDefend provides you a very robust layer of protection to virtually patch those and also stop unknown vulnerabilities. Nice thing about AppDefend is with the Oracle Critical Patch Update October 2020, out of the box, without even updating AppDefend, you were protected of 19 out of the 25 security vulnerabilities because we have a very robust protection for zero-day vulnerabilities. And so then you can update AppDefend and you get a full virtual patching of all 25 vulnerabilities. So very powerful protection. So I'll turn it back to Phil and actually see if we have any questions.
And yes, we do. Thank you, Steve. First question. Can 14750 be bypassed by a mix of upper and lowercase?
Yes. So you can actually do both, and Oracle is actually just, the way they fixed it was not checked just for lowercase or uppercase. They were actually changing running it through like a lowercase function, and actually just checking it against the lowercase function. So it is a robust protection.
Next question. Who should have access to the WebLogic console?
The WebLogic console should really only ever need to be accessed by the DBAs, and specifically the Oracle Business Suite DBAs. No one else should ever go in there, and even that usage is not very much. Yeah, you go in and start and stop things occasionally, but you can do all that through the command line. So generally, if you have some Oracle Business Suite DBAs, they never go in the WebLogic console. Other ones, yeah, they go into it occasionally, check things out, but it's not an active daily type activity, and it should be extremely limited to just the DBAs.
Next one is not, well, maybe it is a question. This seems to be the wrong approach for Oracle to fix this. Surely you would be granted a token upon login, and it would not matter if you were accessing the images folder, you would still need this token. That's the question. You should not assume that someone is authenticated because they got past the login screen. Comments?
Absolutely agree. That typically you wouldn't see this type of bypass on an application because, again, it should be checking the session cookie upon each page access. So I'm not sure why it is on the back end. I don't understand enough about the internal code of how the console works, but yes, someone saying that this is not a very well-written application, I would probably agree with, but I can't comment very much past that.
Next question. Is the second WebLogic patch cumulative?
No, so the second patch is not cumulative. So in order to apply this, you need to apply the two patches. You need to apply the first patch and then actually go in and apply the overlay patch. And the patch numbers are here. And so it's apply step one, apply the first patch, which is the large typical Oracle critical patch update cumulative patch, and then you apply the overlay patch. As part of the January 2021 CPU, you'll only have to apply the one patch because that will be cumulative for both.
Next question. Does this impact our PeopleSoft environment?
Absolutely. PeopleSoft is actually more vulnerable than Oracle Business Suite, and we're actually giving another session at 2 p.m. Eastern time today that talks about the PeopleSoft impact. So that is more significant because, again, the console is exposed externally. If you expose PeopleSoft, it is automatically exposed externally, where an Oracle Business Suite is exposed on a different port, which typically people would never expose. So yes, PeopleSoft is significantly more vulnerable.
All right, I believe that wraps this up for the day. I want to thank everybody for joining us this morning, especially the people from the West Coast. 8 o'clock in the morning is a little early, I understand. But have a great rest of the day. And if you have comments or questions on the PeopleSoft side of it, of this question, please join us this afternoon at 2 o'clock Eastern. Thanks much and have a great rest of the week.